Order of the day number 1, standing in the name of Mr Mailey, the Correctional Services Legislation Amendment Bill 2025, Serial 12, resumption of debate on the question. The bill be now read a second time.
Member for Gwadja, you have 33 minutes remaining on your contribution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, as I was saying before the lunch suspension, these changes brought forward by the member for Nelson, the Minister for Corrections and his team, are ill-conceived and have impacts across the Northern Territory's correctional services environment. It's clear that these changes, as correctional services officers had said, smelt like the former Northern Territory Correctional Commissioner's making. And then, as I said, bugger me, I walk into the briefing and the former Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner's there, the puppet master for the Correctional Services Minister, Jared Mailey, pulling the strings, telling him what to do and how to do it.
Please take your seat, Member for Gwadja. Minister.
By personal name, Madam Speaker, that's against the standing orders.
Yes, you're quite correct. Can we keep this formal?
Madam Speaker, speaking to the point of order.
Yes.
It wasn't a personal attack on the member, and it's not offensive at all.
That's for me to decide, Member for Daly. Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, understanding Order 34, a full name is able to be addressed by a member or the full title.
I'm just going to have a look at 34.
And I might just add,
a member must refer to other members by their title of office or by the name of their electorate. That's not what the member said. So I'm happy
to withdraw, but I'd ask that my 2.5 minutes be reinstated on the clock because it's been remaining ticking while there.
Well, Member for Gwadja, it was two of your members that stood and spoke.
Doesn't matter.
So, okay, we'll wind it back.
Thank you.
A couple of minutes, but can we just keep this formal and use the correct titles? Thank you, Member for Gwadja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I said, these changes smell like the former Northern Territory Correctional Commissioner's making. He's pulling the strings of the Minister for Corrections, who doesn't have an idea of what he's doing. He's been led by his puppet master, the former Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner. That just shows what kind of plan the CLP have. Let's remember what happened the last time the CLP were in charge and the damage, the carnage that was caused in the Northern Territory Correctional Services space. Absolute carnage. Absolutely resulted in the Northern Territory's Royal Commission into the protection and detention of children in the Northern Territory. That's what you're getting under this government, because they bring the very people back who were involved in that, and the puppet over there, the puppet that is being pulled the strings of the puppet master, absolutely has no understanding in what he is doing, Madam Speaker. They've rushed this through again. They haven't allowed any of the important correctional services unions to have a say. They haven't afforded correctional officers to have a say. The Northern Territory Correctional Services Minister is too afraid to speak to correctional services officers because when they were approaching his office for a briefing, he fobbed them off to the Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner because he was too afraid to meet with them, too afraid to hear what they had to say, and just dismissed them. What does that say? What does that say about a minister who's supposed to have your back, who's supposed to absolutely stand up and absolutely fight for the protection, the safety of you at your workplace? It absolutely erodes any credibility that the CLP have in this space, Madam Speaker, when they refuse to even meet with the hard-working Northern Territory Correctional Services staff. That's our hard-working custodial officers. That's our probation and parole officers. That is our non-custodial staff in the environment. All do an incredible job. And I know how hard they work. I was the Northern Territory Correctional Services Minister, but I also was an employee of the Northern Territory Correctional Services as a civilian staff member, and I saw firsthand how hard our correction services workers went every day above and beyond looking after people inside the prison. Absolutely, I acknowledge that. I thank them for their hard work. I thank them for getting up every day and doing that hard and important job, Madam Speaker. But what I don't think is very fair is that this government, who have been in for 170 days, 5 months, said they had a plan, talked about a plan. The only plan the CLP had was to bring back the former Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner, because he's just pulling out all of his old tricks. We know that this measure here, this exact measure that the government is bringing in, is so that when the EBA negotiations come up this year, they can bring in privatised staff when hard-working correctional services officers take protected action, if that's what they choose to defend their rights and their entitlements and to bargain. That's what they're doing. They're removing the provision. What they're doing is they said sneakily in the public, Madam Speaker, this is about escorts, this is about medical escorts, this is about escorts to court. But what was said in our briefing was that this could apply anyone who's sworn as a private contractor by the Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner can also work inside the prison in any position inside there, as long as they've been sworn in by the Commissioner under the direction and the powers that are being introduced by the Correctional Services Minister. So what that says is they're not just coming after the privatisation of prison escorts and hospitalisations, they're coming after hard-working correctional services officers who are inside those correctional centres and our probation and parole officers to privatise the system. That is exactly what they're talking about, Madam Speaker. The CLP government likes to say that they have a mandate whenever it comes to the slightest hint of criticism about actions that they are taking. But surely it's hard for them to justify having a mandate that puts actions that puts Territory workers at risk. This is exactly what this rushed, poor, thought-out piece of legislation is likely to do. Legislation that they refuse to send to a scrutiny committee. Madam Speaker, the conditions in our prisons, particularly our watch houses at the moment, are completely unacceptable for both correctional services officers, inmates, and of course acknowledging the Northern Territory Police Force. Anyone doing the wrong thing should absolutely face the consequences. That has never been and never is in dispute. But knowingly and deliberately housing people in squalid, unsafe conditions is irresponsible and potentially dangerous. We've heard reports of people waiting hours to get a glass of water, Madam Speaker, or have access to a toilet in privacy. It's not just those people, Madam Speaker. They're our people. They are Territorians. We have had people from right across the Northern Territory, even people who voted for the CLP, getting in touch to object to the appalling conditions in the watch houses at the moment. We're hearing stories of 20 women crammed into one cell, sleeping in mattresses under fluoro lights 24 hours a day. No privacy when going to the bathroom or taking a shower every 4 to 5 days. By any standard, it is completely unacceptable, and anyone to be living and working in these conditions is unacceptable. How do we expect prisoners to undergo rehabilitation? How do we expect them to come out of jail with mental health or social health issues when the capacity for the service to deliver it is not there? It is completely counter and utterly counterproductive. This has the hallmarks of a government that has lost control of its own agenda and never had a real plan to start with in the first place. It made big promises to the electorate about making the community safer. Has that actually come to pass? That lot opposite, Madam Speaker, has had their talking points about an extra 500 people they've put in jail. They've admitted that most of these people were already on demand or they were on warrants, Madam Speaker, for their arrest. So we're talking about people who had already committed crimes in the past, people who were always going to be picked up by the police. The story they're trying to spin around of somehow preventing or reducing crime in our communities is nonsense. The Northern Territory crime statistics pretty well bear that out. If you have a good look, Madam Speaker, at the most recent statistics, there is little discerned reduction in crime rates across the Northern Territory since the CLP came to power. There are, of course, fluctuations from month to month, but that appears that the CLP has hardly made a dent despite all of their promises and their press releases and their glossy social media posts. It has been 6 months. Your bail laws and your other law and order measures have been in place, but it is disputable that Territorians are any safer. Looking at the statistics on the police website for the whole of the Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, in December 2023, there were a total of 1,072 offences against a person and 1,996 property offences. Too high, of course. In July 2024, just before the election, property offences against a person were sitting at 1,124 and property offences at 1,650. Then, in November 2024, a number of months into the CLP's first term, the number of offences against a person was sitting at 1,138 and property offences was back up to 1,835. The fine print on the police website also notes that the November 2024 data is likely to increase by a further 10 to 15% in future months as the data analysis is finalised. That puts the crime statistics in November higher than those for December 2023. Hardly the sharp reduction in crime that the CLP promised. I know how hard it is for the CLP to hear this, given their entire reputation and identity is wrapped up in their tough-on-crime rhetoric because they have glass jaws. But accountability means being able to admit when your big words have proven to be not much more than hot air. We've said all along that while the CLP's big shiny policies would put more people in jail, they'll absolutely do nothing to prevent or reduce crime in the first place. That is coming to pass, and we're starting to see the impacts of this punitive-only approach. The CLP, though, seems to have gotten caught up by surprise. This piece of legislation is evident of that. It is a desperate, scambling move that clearly demonstrates the CLP's failed plan and failed to see the foreseeable future that these simplistic policies were always going to have complex and problematic flow-on consequences. We now have dangerously full watch houses and unsafe working conditions, and a desperate move by the CLP to bolster staff resources by using underqualified contractors from interstate, effectively throwing another band-aid over the situation. Last year, the CLP made a big fuss about some new offences they introduced for assaulting workers. It appears their concern for workers' safety doesn't extend to correctional services workers who work tens and thousands of hours in overtime in horrendous and dangerous conditions. Corrections officers are effectively the sacrificial lambs in the CLP's desperate efforts to look like they're actually doing something to improve community safety. On behalf of Territory Labor, I say to the corrections officers, Madam Speaker, we see you, we hear you, and we will work with you and act on that. We know you are bearing the brunt of a party who is playing politics and getting caught out by the consequences of their expedient decisions. I agree with the CLP in one area that this is completely unsustainable, this situation that they are leading us into. And after failing to predict or plan for this set of circumstances, they have certainly now put themselves in the position where they do need to act. However, handing over a contract, Madam Speaker, to an interstate private security firm isn't the solution. Staffing our prisons with underqualified and inappropriately trained private contractors brings even greater safety and wellbeing risks to everyone in our corrections system. We understand it'll be up to the contractor, Madam Speaker. It will be up to the contractor to ensure that the contracts employees are on, they are going to now be required, Madam Speaker, to make sure that those individual staff have a qualification to undertake this work. It's not clear, nor is there anything in the legislation to ensure this monitoring and that it is complied with. This is one of the many loopholes in this thawed, rushed legislation. The CLP will have you believe that these private contractors will only be used for prison transfers and won't be staffing watch houses or correctional facilities. That is simply not true. The legislation is worded in such a way that it allows for the Commissioner to have enormous latitude to put those security contractors wherever they like in the system, regardless of their level of training or ability. There are other answers to the current overflowing in our correctional facilities, but the CLP refuses to sit down and talk to anyone to discuss possible solutions, ignoring their own correctional services officers. They continuously turn their back on people with expertise and experience who could help them find ways to work through and come up with sensible, smarter, safer solutions to resolve the difficult problems. They couldn't even meet with corrections staff in here, in Parliament, this Tuesday. Madam Speaker, this is becoming another hallmark of the CLP government. This we know better attitude and their absolute aversion to genuine consultation or information sharing. What we are seeing is pronouncements via media releases containing more spin than a Shane Warne delivery and less substance than a Bianca Censori dress at the Grammys. We're hearing from so many sectors of our community, from stakeholders right across the territory, who have been completely caught by surprise by a CLP announcement that directly impacts their work, their community, their home, their livelihood. Stakeholders might be given 24 hours notice or 24 hours warning of a briefing or aren't briefed at all about the significant changes. It completely and utterly flies in the face of the CLP's promise to be transparent and accountable. This was certainly the case with these interstate private security contractors. Corrections officers and the union that represents them was given absolutely no advance notice of this significant change that will have a massive impact on the system. We are talking about underqualified, undertrained individuals with no understanding of the Northern Territory's unique context, who will be thrown into our prisons and expected to keep them safe and secure for inmates and staff alike. Madam Speaker, I don't in any way throw shade on these individuals, but I do have grave concern about the situations that we are going to be throwing them into without adequate, proper training. What's even more concerning is that there are underutilised correctional facilities that could be opened up right now, facilities that are much more suited to managing the current prison population, keeping staff safe and costs down. Madam Speaker, there are better solutions to the particular problem of the CLP's making, and they should start employing them. I spoke earlier about the CLP's propensity for spin. I want to particularly make note of the corrections narrative, which they repeat ad nauseum as though saying it over and over again will make it true. They'll do anything to deflect their lack of planning or understanding of the consequences of their actions. Madam Speaker, Labor had short, long and medium-term plans for corrections and our investment matched. Our last budget, Budget 2024, introduced an additional $191 million for correctional services, which included $37 million for a standalone therapeutic women's prison in Alice Springs and Darwin, $20 million for an interim training centre for male prisoners in Darwin, $93 million for custodial services to increase the workforce and expand programs to break the cycle of reoffending, not something that the CLP prioritises, as we know. Full plans to upgrade and refurbish G Block in Alice Springs, the maximum security division. This investment came on top of a $95 million package in the previous year, which allowed for more correction staff to be recruited to meet increased demand. We did the work and made the investment to bring on an extra 96 beds in Alice Springs, which the CLP now gammon claim credit for. When I was in office, Madam Speaker, as the Northern Territory Correctional Services Minister for the remaining 2 years of our term, I fully understood the challenges our dedicated correction officers were facing. I made it a priority to meet with them regularly, to take divisive and defensive action for them, and shared their concerns. One of the key initiatives I spearheaded was the opening of the Northern Territory's first ever bail support accommodation facilities in Alice Springs and Darwin, which have proven to be a tremendous success and continue to make a significant impact. Additionally, we forged a partnership with the Charles Darwin University through a memorandum of understanding to provide essential training and certificate qualifications, equipping our officers and our corrections inmates with the skills they need to thrive in their roles. I instructed the Corrections Commissioner to begin the work conducting a comprehensive review into prison industries and develop a plan to restart these critical services. I know firsthand how important these industries are. We'd begun work to reform the delivery of health services, with the prison system considering moving to a 24-hour rostered care system and telehealth. Under my leadership, Madam Speaker, we developed and implemented additional alternatives to custody built on from the former Corrections Minister, Minister Yubo, which achieved impressive outcomes across the Northern Territory. This model is a model that the current Corrections Minister and Attorney General should be out there visiting and expanding to further strengthen our correctional system. I heard today the Attorney General claiming credit for the expansion of the Women's Alternative to Custody facility. That is just absolute nonsense. That process had already been embarked on under the former government. The CLP have come in here and upended a range of well thought out and thought through areas for improvement to our correctional facilities. That weren't just about locking people up. They were also about ensuring that people in our system had access to support services and that it would help turn their lives around and reduce reoffending. That, Madam Speaker, is all out the window now. We know that prisoners are now being held in substandard conditions with remand inmates with sentenced inmates. We know young people are being taken away from their country and shipped to Darwin, which will set back their chances for rehabilitation. I'm actually interested, Madam Speaker, if the Education Minister is going to be paying the fines for young children who are held in detention whose educational opportunities have been removed. We know Aboriginal women, many who are suffering from extreme trauma, who are stuck in conditions that offer none of the therapeutic supports that they desperately need to get their lives back on track. Madam Speaker, as I said in my opening, the CLP has made a big claim on their mandate, and they've absolutely, Madam Speaker, have claimed to be voted in on a law and order mandate. There is no evidence and no data anywhere in the world that suggests holding people in squalid conditions without the mental, social and medical assistance they need will see them return to our community as model citizens. Equally, the situation is deeply unacceptable for our correctional services officers. Instead, Madam Speaker, of focusing on plans that will actually ensure safe standards in our corrections facilities, the CLP is focused on doubling down on a particularly bad idea. They don't listen, they don't consult, Madam Speaker. They think they know best, and they continue to roll ahead time and time again without including people in the community. Madam Speaker, I also wanted to take the opportunity to place on the record, we've heard today from the Northern Territory Correctional Services Minister. Now, those of us who have been in this parliament with the Northern Territory Correctional Services Commission Minister and the Treasurer both ask a really important question. They're in a government that is claiming that they need to lock more people up. Yet they've been on the record of saying jailing is failing. The Northern Territory Correctional Services Minister and the Treasurer have said jailing is failing, yet everything that they're doing is to jail more people. So they are aware, and by their own admission, they are further perpetuating their own failures, Madam Speaker. I absolutely acknowledge, again, in this contribution, the amazing Northern Territory Correctional Services workforce. I acknowledge the Northern Territory Correctional Services prisoners, prison associations, for all the great work that they absolutely do. The work, the advocacy they do drives positive change, drives progressive change. As I said earlier, it was changes that came up through them that enabled the previous government to make changes in WorkSafe, to ensure that they were afforded the same protection as other frontline workers when it came to the recognition of PTSD and the need for them to not have to be pulled kicking and screaming and to have to go and find the hard examples of where they have been experienced to post-traumatic stress disorder. That was an important change. The changes that we've seen, the 96-bed hospital, the prison accommodation, the G Block upgrade in Alice Springs came directly from Northern Territory Correctional Services officers, because I was not afraid to meet with them as the minister. And I'll never be afraid to meet with a bunch of individuals and the associations who absolutely care about the people of the Northern Territory. I will always meet with them. I will always meet with the United Workers Union, who represents our hard-working prison officers, because it is absolutely crucial, Madam Speaker, that we absolutely listen to what they have to say. Because we hear in this chamber from members in the government who say, with a lot of their stuff, a lot of their evidence comes from what they've heard on the doors. Well, why not listen to what the prison officers have to say? They are hard-working Territorians on the front line who have heard day in, day out, who don't want their industry privatised, who don't want their sector jobs given away to private industry. They want to be valued. They want to be seen. They want you to understand that you don't just walk into a prison and become a prison officer. You undergo training by existing officers whose job it is to train you up. Now, just to provide an understanding, when you become a prison officer, you do have 12 months to complete the relevant training, the certificates, Certificate 3 in security and so forth, first aid certificates, and you've got 12 months to reach those. But you have quality assurance and evaluation and key performance indicators that exist within the Northern Territory Correctional Services that monitor and evaluate and make sure that you've reached those competencies, that you're able to do it. What the Corrections Service Minister has brought here today is legislation that is weak as, because nowhere in there does it hold the private companies to account to make sure that their contractors have had the training, have completed the training. And there is no mechanism in that for the Northern Territory Correctional Services to follow up and make sure, apart from being told by the contractor, yeah, mate, she'll be right, she's done it. That is not okay. That is not being accountable. That is not being transparent. That is eroding the profession of being a Northern Territory Correctional Services worker. A job that many people across the Northern Territory have had great pride in doing for a number of years, Madam Speaker. A job that has been a career for many people to work their way up the ranks in the correctional services sector, to take on important roles. What this says is that we have no respect for the custodial nature of correctional services. Because if they start doing this now, what's next? Removing superintendents as correctional officers and bringing in administrative private companies to manage the prison? This is a dark day, Madam Speaker, for Northern Territory Correctional Services workers, because this is the beginning of the erosion of an important workforce. A workforce who have said time and time again, out of this building, in the public domain, we have the answers. We have the solutions. We know how you can improve this system. Listen to us. Give us the opportunity to shape Northern Territory Correctional Services into the future. Now, let's be under no illusion, the Territory's Northern Territory Correctional Services is a big area in the Territory, and it's going to be an area that needs a lot of reform now and well into the future. But it's reform that, if you don't include the very people who work in it, is not going to be fit for purpose, is not going to deliver the desired outcomes. It's important that we listen to that and we respond and we act. And yes, there are things that the government may consider that I will support where they're appropriate Minister for Corrections, you want to bring back prison industries, please talk to the Commissioner about the work that we had started on beefing up and doing a review into what industries we could actually do. I'll support that, absolutely. Like, it's a great idea. But privatising and bringing in is not okay. There's loopholes around the liability, the torts liability, around a correctional services private contractor. Can they ignore the advice of the Corrections Commissioner once they're in there? If something happens to them in the prison, what's the process? How is that measured? These are all issues that we haven't been told. And the government come in here, drop the bill on the day, and then, as they're speaking, send an email out offering a briefing in an hour and 20 minutes' time. How is that being open, transparent and accountable? How is that affording everyone the opportunity to have a say? It's not. It's absolutely not. And we need to do more because they deserve us to do more. But we need to also think outside the box. We need to look at the expansion of alternative to custodies. We need to look at potentially, member for Barclay, having an alternative bail support accommodation facility in the Barclay region. I know that Catherine was always an area I wanted to see bail support accommodation and wanted to look at establishing an alternative to custody or a work camp. Important stuff. So today I say to the correctional officers in Alice Springs, in the Barclay work camp, in Datchula, in the Darwin Correctional Centre, and to those other staff who are working at the old Birramar prison, I absolutely see you, I hear you. We will work with you into the future on ideas and suggestions that can shape a better correctional services system, absolutely. I implore the government to consider using stringy bark and paper bark as alternative correctional facilities in the interim. Because one of the things that I was absolutely passionate about, and my limited time that I had as the Northern Territory Correctional Services Commission, working with them, and as the Minister, was I didn't want women inside the Darwin Correctional Centre because they are surrounded by custodial divisions that house men. They're in the middle, and it's not right. The planning had started on looking at alternative options because we needed to do it. Stringy bark was that appropriate option in the interim until further master planning was done, where women could have children, could have babies with them, could engage in therapeutic responses, and we could absolutely develop our own prison industries for women, because that's important. The designs of the Northern Territory correctional facilities across the Territory has fluctuated over the years. The Alice Springs Correctional Centre was built based on the Royal Commission into the deaths in custody some years ago, which had dorm-style rooms. The Darwin Correctional Facility, very, very different responses. You go into both, they're very different because the climate is different as well. But I want to just give a shout out as well to the staff, not just the correctional services workers and the custodial staff, but I want to acknowledge people in the Northern Territory Correctional Services for all the work that they do. Madam Speaker, can I get an extension of time under Standing Order 43?
The member has requested an extension of time. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Please continue.
Thank you. As I was saying, Madam Speaker, I wanted to just acknowledge Northern Territory Correctional Services employees across the whole Northern Territory Correctional Services community, because I know that there have been outstanding people who have done good work in the planning of all of those, and good work in terms of getting everything ready. Doing the work to support the system is incredibly important, and I think that we absolutely need to acknowledge them tonight. Certainly, keeping the prisons open is a mammoth task, and when we talk about correctional services officers, We are not just talking about someone who is out in the prison following and watching people. We're talking about our correctional services officers who run the horticulture programs, who run the kitchen, who run the laundry, who feed our correctional inmates every single day. That is thousands of meals a day that are being pumped out through Northern Territory Correctional Services. They also have helped when natural disasters have hit, setting up, the safety camps for people who have been brought in from evacuations or meals. So let's just acknowledge them. I know that there are many people who are doing it hard listening to this, and I want them to know that it is difficult. But a Territory Labor government, when re-elected, will absolutely right the wrong that the CLP is doing here today, because this is unjust, it is unnecessary. I want to acknowledge the teams that have done the work in the recruitment drive. Very successful recruitment drives were undertaken when I was the Minister. We worked hard to get the Darwin Correctional Facility staffing up and running. From what I've heard, it's looking pretty good. Alice Springs has always been a challenge. I know that there's good work. I want to give a shout out to the corrections teams who have done the work in feeding into the recruitment. I know that there was some interstate and international travel to encourage people to consider an amazing career in Northern Territory Correctional Services, and we had a very good success rate from that. And that is something that needs to continue. A lot of work in that came as well from listening to correctional services officers and the unions around targeting groups that we could potentially work with to get them into Northern Territory Correctional Services. So it is a good time to acknowledge that contribution that they make, Madam Speaker. And also, I want to just acknowledge the work that was being undertaken with that MOU with Charles Darwin Uni to get people in and trained and get their right qualifications so that when they are released from prison, it works. But what we are seeing here today is the start of privatisation. You can say what you want about it, it's not privatising, it is, but bringing in private security firms into prison to do that job is privatisation. And there has been no consultation with Northern Territory hospitals around when these private companies now will be sitting out the front of a room of an inmate who has to go to hospital. No consultation at all. We're hearing from the health organisations about that. No conversations with any of the local law firms in our local communities around the escorts to court. And then we're hearing as well the way that this has been worded will provide the opportunity for them to go into the general population of correctional services officers and be within the correctional environment. These are areas of great concern, and these are areas that the government absolutely need to take a long, hard look at themselves. But we know that that's not going to happen because we know that the Corrections Minister doesn't have any clue what he's doing. And I don't need to tell you, you don't have to believe me. You can listen to Katie Wolf, you can listen to the ABC, NT News, NT Independent, when they've asked him and he said, oh, we've got a plan, we're working on a plan, there's a plan somewhere, I can't tell you yet about the plan, is because he hasn't been told what to say by his puppet master, the former Northern Territory Correctional Services Commissioner. Because that's the type of minister you've got. You've got a puppet. He doesn't know what to say until he's told what to say. So, Madam Speaker, in conclusion, Labor will be opposing this bill. Labor will be standing with the workers and making sure that this important profession is recognised, is valued and is absolutely fixed in the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this important debate. It is one that I hope many people take the opportunity to speak to, and I encourage many of you when you leave this parliament, don't be cowardless like the Minister for Correctional Services. Get out and talk to a Northern Territory Correctional Services worker. Get out and talk to the Northern Territory unions. I know the Health Minister has spoken to the unions. He's probably the only comrade we've got over on that side. But get out and talk to them. Get out and talk to people who defend the worker every day. Get out and, oh look, I've hit a nerve, the interjections from the puppet, from the Correctional Services Minister. Oh, I can see the strings, they're being pulled. Yep, he knows what to say. He knows what...
Okay,
yeah, there it
that's
goes.
enough.
But hop out. Go and talk to... don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of a Correctional Services worker. They might look big and strong and tough, and they are big and strong and tough, but they have a heart and they care about people. They care about their work. They care about Territorians, and they want you to value them as well. So value them. Value them. Talk about it. And Minister, be honest with your plans. Be honest with your plans, because we've heard you time and time again on Katie Wolf, on ABC, on the wonderful NT Independent. When you're asked, I think we've got a plan. There's a plan somewhere. I didn't bring the plan. We're working on the plan. They've got a plan for a plan. We're going to plan to do a plan. Oh, hang on, I'll ring me old mate up. Come back to the Northern Territory and come back. I can't give you the Commissioner's role yet, but come back and we'll roll out your plan. Because your plan, under the CLP, got us into a Royal Commission into the protection and detention of young people in the Northern Territory. And under a CLP government, there is going to be, under a CLP government, we've heard...
Cease the interjections, please.
We have heard loud and clear from concerned residents, from family members who have tried to get a visit to the prison, from our unions, from our correctional services officers. There is going to be a death in custody because of the conditions that the CLP are exposing Territorians to, and that only intensifies when you bring in an unqualified workforce to do the job of a hard-working correctional services officer. So go home, have a look in the mirror, remind yourself who you're here to represent and what you're here to do, and don't be afraid to reach out when a correctional services officer walks into your electorate. Don't go and make out you got a meeting or you're busy, or don't send them off to the Commissioner for Corrections like you have with the union, like you have with the workers now. Meet with them. Hear what they have to say. Hear their lived experience each and every day, because that's the experience that matters. You talk about wanting to have things in line with community expectations. Well, people expect to be able to go to work and not have their job undermined. People expect you to value their profession. People expect it to be safe for them to go to work and not work alongside an unqualified workforce that has no accountability, that cannot even have an answer when they ask a question, have you finished your qualifications? Have you got the right qualifications? Those private officers, they don't have to. There's nowhere in the legislation that says that accountability measure must be addressed other than the Corrections Commissioner asking for it, and there is nothing that will compel him to do it unless it is in the contract, of which we will never see the contract, but it is an important conversation to have. So don't be shame, be game, and meet with the Correctional Services staff, meet with the union, because they will absolutely be able to help reform correctional services.
Member for Casuarina, no clapping. We'll have no clapping.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Point of order. I just pick up on the clapping, and I just want it noted for Hansard that was the Correctional Services Minister clapping at my speech because he thinks it's so good.
No,
Thank you.
sit